36. So we're just going to start, and we'll let you know when a quorum is present. Oh, and now a quorum is present. So the Minnesota Senate Education Finance Committee is now going to come to order. Today we're going to be focusing on mental health in our schools. We have presentations from Minnesota Violence Prevention Project and Vital Network, and then we'll hear Senator Westlin, Senate File 2634. Before we get going, I'm going to just go through a few housekeeping items as usual. Let's see, everyone here today must be seated when they're in the hearing room. There's no standing or sitting in the sideways or aisles. If you need further accommodations, please let the sergeants know. Clapping and other disruptions are not allowed. And if these protocols are not followed, you may be removed from the room. Members, remember to turn on and off your microphones when you're done speaking especially, and limit your side conversations to avoid additional interruptions on the live stream. And again, thank you to our sergeants for all the work that they do. I'm just going to add a little bit, maybe I should have done this on the very first day. It's just like when school starts and you kind of go over the classroom rules and expectations. But our Senate rules instruct us to follow our administrative policies in order to maintain cooperation and civility. The Senate Code of Conduct on page 4 of our Senate Policy Manual lists guidelines on expected demeanor and appropriate behavior. I thought it would be useful to remind the committee about our Code of Conduct as well as the guidelines around committees. As members and employees of the Senate, we are entrusted with the welfare, property, security, and safety of the people we serve and the people of Minnesota. So the expectation is that we treat each other and the public fairly, equally, with dignity and respect. And we will be courteous to the public and respectful of this institution. Decorum in our committees, I just want to remind you that the committee chair is responsible for order, decorum, and quiet. All members of the committee are responsible for enforcing respectful treatment of each other and the public. All members and speakers should request permission from and address their comments to the chair and through the chair. Respectfully address people by giving testimony as Mr. or Ms. or whatever their title is. Be sensitive and attentive to people testifying and their concerns. A senator should not use insulting or personally or socially offensive language when addressing members of the public. A senator should not speak impertinently, attack the motives of any senator who proposes or advocates a particular position, use indecent language or other disorderly words, or refer to another senator by name in a disparaging way. And a senator should not interrupt another member. And again, these can all be found under our Code of Conduct in our Senate Manual 1.25. So with that, we are going to move along to our hearing.
Madam Speaker, or not Speaker, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just a quick question on that. So the motive part that you just read, I want to make sure I heard that correctly. So in committee, it is part of our Code of Conduct as senators to not question the motives of another member. Did I hear that correctly?
That is what our Code of Conduct states.
Okay. The reason I'm asking for clarification, thank you, is in the interim last year, there was a meeting chaired by Senator Latz, and Senator Mohammed directly questioned the motives of the GOP members. And Latz, in that committee, he said that the rule of not questioning the motive of another member only applied to the floor and not to committee. So I'm just trying to rectify those two positions. So I appreciate that clarification from you.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to begin with a presentation from Minnesota Violence Prevention. We have a project. We have Dr. Jillian Peterson and Dr. James Densley. If you would like to introduce yourself, and you may begin.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having us this morning. My name is Jillian Peterson. I am Executive Director of the Violence Prevention Project Research Center, also a professor of criminology at Hamline University, and I'm a psychologist by training. So one of the things we were asked to talk about today is kind of the mental health impact of gun violence, the mental health impact of fear of gun violence in our schools. So I'm going to start by talking about that piece of it and then pass to James Densley to talk more about kind of what we know about the perpetrators of school mass shootings and what we can do in our schools in terms of prevention. So the Violence Prevention Project Research Center, our mission is to use data and research to reduce violence, to kind of empower the public, guide practitioners, give people nonpartisan data and research that they can use to make good decisions. So hopefully we can be helpful today, and very happy to answer questions in the future. A lot of our work originally stemmed looking at mass shootings, where 4 more people are killed in a public space. That's the book we wrote about that. We have actually really expanded our work to look at all forms of gun violence. So we have a new database that tracks every homicide that occurred in a K-12 school going back over 25 years. And those are coded on who did it, why they did it, where they did it, what the weapon was used, all that information, which may be useful in the future. And so we'll draw upon that data a little bit here today. In terms of gun violence exposure and the mental health impacts, we actually did a study 2 years ago where we surveyed 10,000 Americans. It was a representative sample. We actually, in 2023, were funded by the state legislature. And so one of the things we did is did this huge survey to look at the extent that people are exposed to gun violence, the mental health impacts, and what that means. What we found, which was actually kind of shocking to us, is that 7% of Americans report being on the scene of a mass shooting where 4 more people were shot in any context. That actually, we didn't believe that statistic at first, and so we redid the survey, and it's since been replicated a 3rd time, so it does seem to stand. And if you think about it, when there's, for example, the mass shooting that occurred at Brown University, there was probably hundreds of thousands of people within, a 10-block radius that went into lockdown that considered themselves on the scene. So you can imagine that this is true, but it's really an astounding number. 1/3 of those say that they were physically injured in some way, shape, or form. That could be shot, trampled, shrapnel, and the youngest generation is the most exposed. So if we look at kind of 25 and under, 14% of young people say that they have been on the scene of a mass shooting where 4 or more people were shot. We do see differences between gang members and non-gang members. So if you say that you have been gang affiliated at some point in your life, 83% have been on the scene of a mass shooting, compared to 25% of those who say they were not in a gang. We asked, what was the mental health impact of that gun violence exposure, right? So really, and of course this is self-report. As a psychologist, I did not go in and clinically assess all of these people. I wish I had the resources to do that. So it's just saying, when you were exposed to gun violence, did you experience these things? We saw incredibly high rates of people reporting depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and panic disorder. Rates much higher in the general population. So anxiety was actually the most common. People exposed to gun violence, and this is sort of any type of exposure to gun violence, 48 to 58% say they had experienced anxiety afterwards. 35 to 74% said that they were experiencing depression after. And so I think I'm not sure we give gun violence exposure kind of the credit that it deserves in terms of thinking about mental health impacts. We spend a lot of time thinking about sort of the mental health of young people, but we don't think about sort of this piece of it and how it's driving a lot of that. The highest rates of mental health impacts were from mass shootings specifically, but if we looked at other forms of gun violence, it's actually longer term, the mental health impacts. So we asked, did these symptoms last a year or more? And we were pretty stunned by the number of people who said, yes, it wasn't just a 2-week period where I was anxious and depressed, it actually went on for more than a year. So this is becoming more of a permanent situation from this exposure. Interestingly, even community level exposure increases mental health impacts. So we asked, did a mass shooting occur in your community? So for example, probably most people in Minneapolis, after experiencing the Annunciation shooting, could say something happened in their community. We saw mental health impacts just from that. You weren't on the scene, you weren't there, you didn't know anyone, but it felt like it happened in your community, and that actually really elevates your risk. This is kind of what we talked about just in terms of the symptom breakdown. Anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and post-traumatic stress were the ones that we asked about specifically. We saw the biggest mental health impacts amongst young people. So the younger you were, the bigger the impact. Also bigger mental health impacts amongst women. Again, this is always a problem in surveys. Are women just more likely to report and disclose? But they did report higher rates. Also, people who were self-reported as Black or Hispanic were more likely to report impacts from community mass shootings. So this was sort of something that was occurring across the board. So kind of summary slides. We know gun violence exposure is associated with all this stuff, more pronounced amongst women, younger individuals, and racial minorities. There is long-term functional and emotional impairments. We did not ask about kind of the effects on things like aggression and substance use. I wish we would have. There have been studies that have looked specifically at adolescent boys and gun violence exposure and found that when they've been exposed, they are more likely to have what's called reactive aggression, which is like more quick to respond, more impulsive. And so then you see this sort of cycle of violence, right? When you've been exposed, you're more likely to react, which increases the exposure. And then beyond just exposure, there have been a number of studies looking at fear of gun violence amongst young people. There was a 2022 national survey for teenagers 14 to 17. 75% reported some type of worry about gun violence in their schools. So 3/4 of students said that they were worried. 1 in 5, so 20% of young people said they were extremely worried. And there has now been several replications of this that this seems to hold. So the vast majority of students are worried about this when they're going to school. Same thing for parents. So about 41% of parents report that they are afraid for their children's safety at school. We're seeing increases in things like bulletproof backpacks and demands for those types of things that make parents feel like they're sending their kids to school in a safer way. But this is a pervasive fear. And I will say, as a parent of 3 young kids, I have it too. I think most of us who are parents feel this on a daily basis. Teachers are afraid as well. So more and more data coming out that teachers are leaving their positions because of fear of gun violence, that they are afraid to go to school because of fear of gun violence, that they're dropping out of education programs because of fear of gun violence. And we have put a lot of this on the backs of our teachers in our schools to be the ones who have to, drill for this, know how to respond to this, feel the pressure to handle this if it were to occur. And that is a really heavy burden for a lot of our educators in the classroom. This kind of maps on to general feelings of fear. We're seeing kind of the highest rates about fear of public safety than we've seen in the past 3 decades. This is true across the aisle, whether you're Republican, Democrat, people generally see crime as a major concern and feel more afraid for their safety than they have in a long time. Since kind of the 70s and early 80s when we had serial killers and kidnappings, we're pushing back to those levels. Things got better for a while and now people are feeling really afraid again. Fear also impacts behavior. So we also asked about gun ownership and safe storage in that same survey. It's about half of people report storing their guns safe and securely. When we looked at folks who don't store their guns safely, they stated the reason why, or we could insinuate the reason why, because they report high levels of fear. Fear of being shot in their home, fear of being shot in their neighborhood. That makes them want to have a firearm right next to them and accessible. And so that fear ends up driving sort of how we safely secure. We also are seeing higher rates of students carrying weapons. We just finished a big study in the St. Paul Public Schools where we are seeing higher rates of students carrying knives, carrying firearms. They say that that's because they are afraid, right? It's not because they want to attack someone, it's because they're scared someone's going to attack them and they want to feel like they can defend themselves. So that fear ends up actually escalating real world violence when you have more people walking around armed. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on drills. So there has been more research emerging on the impact of school shooting and active shooter drills on accelerating that fear. We don't really, the data is not great in terms of if school shooting drills work, right? There have been cases where the fact that kids had drilled made it so they were able to get behind doors quickly and lives were saved. There have been instances where because kids drilled, they did the wrong thing and lives are probably cost. So it's hard to really measure. What we do know is that students report higher levels of anxiety. Some of them, they will say they feel more prepared. They will also say they feel more afraid it's going to happen. And so it's hard to balance those two things. Other concerns around that is sort of the most likely perpetrator is a kid in the building running through the drill along with everybody else. This idea of kind of social contagion, creating this fascination at an early age. We now have examples of perpetrators of school shootings who say, I got interested in this by running through drills at a young age. And so I think sometimes the things that we put in place to keep kids safe end up kind of escalating that fear and contributing to that social contagion piece of mass shootings. And with that, I'm going to pass to James.
So, Madam Chair and the committee, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is James Densley. I am the co-founder of the Violence Prevention Project with Gillian. I'm also a professor and department chair of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Metro State University. We have just given you the context for fear, anxiety, mental health impacts of exposure to gun violence and the general climate of fear in and around schools, particularly referencing school shootings. What I want to do now is to pivot to what we know about the perpetrators of school shootings and what implications that might have for your work here in the committee as you think about policy going forward. So Gillian and I are known for our research into the lives of mass shooters and the pathway to violence that we outlined in that research, that it's often rooted in early childhood trauma to a point where somebody reaches an identifiable crisis point in their life. It's often a suicidal crisis. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then they look for models of behavior where they can copycat and learn from previous shooters to a point where they then seek the opportunity through access to firearms and people and places to perpetrate the act of violence itself. This pathway is something that we have seen time and time again in the lives of school shooters. But as we interrogate those lives, we also see some other important things that have implications for practice and for policy. So the first thing I want to flag is that when we look at mass shooters in schools and active shooter situations in K-12 buildings, these perpetrators tend to be insiders. What we mean by that is that they are either current or former students of the schools where they attack. They also tend to be teenage boys. That is the general demographic for who we are talking about. So when we think about the perpetrators of school violence, we're talking about teenage boys, and we are talking about current or former students. That has implications when you think about, for instance, running those same people through active shooter drills. It has implications for when we think about hardening schools, because is the objective here to lock out the bad guys or to keep them in? Because these individuals are already in the building, they are walking through that security every single day. They're very familiar with the way in which the school is laid out. The second thing to flag is that these are students who are in a crisis. What's important about this is a crisis is a time-limited event. You're not always in crisis. That would not be a crisis. That would be something much deeper. The fact that it's time-limited means that it can be intervened with. So when someone's in crisis, it's noticeable. It's a change in their behavior from baseline. Now, we often see in the lives of the school shooters that we've studied that they are exhibiting multiple signs of a crisis, increased aggression, a losing touch with reality, and so on. Why this is important is because the more we can do to get upstream of the crisis, to notice the warning signs in advance and have systems that can communicate to one another so that we can intervene appropriately, we can get upstream of the issue, and we can prevent violence. This ties with the next point, which is the fact that these types of events, when a mass shooting occurs in a school, it is usually intended to be a final act. The vast majority of perpetrators of this level of violence are actively suicidal before the crime, and they intend to die in the act. The mindset of a mass shooter is that they no longer care if they live or die. This gives us some important implications for prevention. Number one, the things that we do in the world of suicide prevention are directly applicable to the world of mass shooting prevention. Number two, if we can give young people purpose, if we can give them a reason to live, connection, friendship, family, love, these are all things that are protective of those going on the pathway to violence. Now, when you are in an existential crisis to a point that you no longer care if you live or die, you start to ask some very deep questions about yourself and your identity. Where you find those answers is on the internet. And unfortunately, there are now dark corners of the internet where mass shooters, particularly school shooters, have been heroized, celebrated, and are now held up as examples for model behavior. We see a copycat phenomena that is particularly strong among adolescents who are intending to perpetrate this form of violence. A radicalization in true crime communities online that provides people with incentives to perpetrate these crimes. So here are some implications from an education standpoint. Parents, teachers, and administrators need to be aware of these warning signs. They need to know when somebody is going down that pathway of studying past violence and becoming fascinated in these dark corners of the internet where this violence is held up as being a possible solution to one's problems. Now, in the course of this, shooters are often leaking their plans in advance. Leakage is a technical term out of the behavioral threat assessment and management space. It generally means that it's spilling out of you. We see this very common in the lives of school shooters, which is to say that they are telegraphing violence in advance, often as a final last-ditch cry for help. They're screaming out into the void to see if anyone's paying attention. What we've seen time and time again in these cases is that everybody's holding a little piece of information about that individual. A teacher knows something, an administrator knows something, maybe a school resource officer knows something, and it might be a parent knows something and a peer knows something as well. But the problem is that those individuals are not talking to one another. So they're seeing these little pieces of information in isolation. They're brushing it off as they were just joking. They're not really going to do it. James would never do something like that. But then when you see these pieces put together, you see the bigger picture. The implication here is the more we can do to stand up the processes of behavioral threat assessment and management and to ensure that they are working at the local levels can again be protective and can save lives. The final point to flag is by virtue of age, the vast majority of school mass shooters are not old enough to purchase firearms themselves. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, they tend to be young adolescents that can't get guns unless they get them from somebody else. So there is a call here for the more we can do in education environments to promote ideas around safe storage, that you don't beg, borrow, and steal guns. And if you have got somebody who is in a crisis, that is not the time to be giving them access to firearms. So there are lots of implications here in the education space when we think about this. If shooters are insiders, we have to think beyond the doors and the drills. Those are reactive strategies. They're not necessarily preventative ones. Crisis intervention is key. The more that we can do to notice the signs of a crisis and to set up the strategies to intervene in a crisis, the safer we're going to be. If we recognize that these shootings tend to be a final act, the more we can do around suicide prevention in our schools, not just punishing those that threaten violence, but thinking about this as a cry for help, is going to help us, again, get ahead of this problem. Recognizing that these shooters tend to study other shooters, that they are often being radicalized online, the more we can do around digital and media literacy, not just for the young people themselves, but for the educators, so they too can notice the warning signs of what the memes mean and the images are on people's computers. They're leaking plans. This leakage is an opportunity for intervention. The more we can do around threat assessment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. And then, again, with the firearms piece, extreme risk protection orders, safe storage, communication to parents and families within school environments. There's a captive audience here to keep retailing that message that we're all part of this together, that we're all trying to keep people safe. Now, the piece about behavioral threat assessment and management, we've been doing some work over the last 3 years with the St. Paul Public Schools, where we stood up what we called care teams in these schools. We noticed that one of the biggest barriers to the implementation of behavioral threat assessment and management was the fact that it was called behavioral threat assessment and management. It's a jargon sort of term, and the operative word in it is threat. And what happens is that many teachers and administrators and people that care about children don't see these young people as a threat. They don't want to label them as a threat. And let's be honest, no parent wants to get a phone call and say that your child's been referred to the threat team. Differently is you might want to get that call if you've been referred to the care team and your child has been identified as a student in need of care. So sometimes by thinking about the language that we use and by approaching this from a slightly different perspective, you can still achieve the same outcomes. So what we did with the care team is we basically just reassembled and rebranded threat assessment in the St. Paul Public Schools. We wanted to ensure that everybody was on the same page for this process, from the district level all the way down to the individual school level. So now there are district-wide care teams that provide education and training for the local level care teams, and the local level care teams can refer to the district level team if they feel like a case is beyond their capacity. We're trying to create systems for information sharing, to break down silos, and to improve communication with the goal of saving lives. When you've got a young person presenting in front of you who presents as a risk, what can we do to give them the care and support that they need? The intervention is going to look different for each different child. It's not always punitive. You can think about restorative measures, you can think about counseling, mental health support, and otherwise, to provide the types of interventions that can get somebody off of that pathway to violence before they ever purchase a firearm or get access to it, and before they ever pull the trigger. And so with that, I think that's our time for the presentation, but we're very happy to answer any questions, and we hope this is helpful as you think about your work in trying to keep kids safe in school and what we've learned from our research in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson and Dr. Densley. This was really, really super informative. It felt like a lot of this we already knew, but the fact that you've been able to go back and prove the data time and time again, that this isn't just one-off, but this is actual real drama and trauma and long-term trauma, not just for our students, but for our teachers and, of course, the families and communities. So thank you. Senator Rarick, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to two of the slides that you have, it was the number 3 and number 4, where shooting is the final act and then shooters study each other. As I read the comments on the page number 3, the shooter was looking at this as, like I said, the final act, but yet in this case they were apprehended. But as they study others, do we know what percentage of shooters in these school shootings actually are shot by the police and versus how many are apprehended. So is this actually the final act in many cases, or the majority of the cases? As they study each other, do they see that?
Dr.
Sure. It's a great question. We do know that. So we have all of that data coded. You have to be known for this, right? The goal is to make the history books, to make the headlines, to be a part of this group. In order to do that, you have to be either caught or killed. Nobody really actively tries to escape from this because that's not the goal, right? The goal is to get and be recognized in these spaces like the people who came before you. So it's about a third kill themselves, third killed by somebody else, and a third apprehended. We are seeing a slight shift towards school shooters who actually want to survive, who will actually like get on their knees and put their hands in the air because they actually want to live out the infamy and live out the aftermath and see it happen, knowing they're going to be in prison the rest of their lives, but they want the fan mail and the TV coverage to experience that. So that is a slight shift, but most of them are being killed on the scene.
Yeah.
Follow up? Thank you. Senator May-Quade?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do a little, my work outside the legislature is, and some of it's related to gender-based violence, and so I know from that work that there's ties to misogyny and mass shootings, but I don't know much more than that. Could you just elaborate on that and what you're seeing?
Sure. Go for it. Yes, so we do see, well, there's a couple of things. The profile of a mass shooter, if you think about it that way, is disproportionately male. So 97% of all mass shooters in our database, this is not just school shootings, this is any context, are men. So this trends, of course, with violence writ large, when you think about domestic violence, homicide, gun violence, all different forms, tends to be perpetrated by men, and that is globally. It's a global statistics, about 90% of homicide, for instance. So on the one hand, you look at this and you think, okay, this does seem to be a male issue, but then you also have, within the profiles of these individuals, a kind of aggrieved entitlement that underpins some of this violence that feels very masculine in this sense, that you've been sort of entitled to certain outcomes in life that you have not achieved, and therefore you feel like the world owes you something, and you're going to get what's due through this act of violence. So this aggrieved entitlement is something that we have seen in several of these cases going forward. Now, the other piece about this is there's been a lot of media coverage of late about a very small number of transgender perpetrators of violence, and this has become a popular narrative now on the internet, that this is an epidemic and so on. In our data, we look at 4 or more people killed in a public space as a definition of a mass shooting. Under that definition, there's only 1 transgender shooter in the entire database, which means they're underrepresented, not overrepresented, based on general population. And even if you expand the definition out to look at our other homicide databases, we have a small handful of cases, which still means that they are underrepresented, not overrepresented. So it's one of these situations of sort of selection bias, where you can recall the 3 or 4 cases that you recently heard about in the news. You forget all the other cases that came before it, which were all perpetrated by males. For instance, nobody's having a conversation right now about the gender identity of the perpetrator of the mass shooting in Texas. That doesn't seem to be part of the narrative. So it's an example of when it's convenient, we can use certain things to label people, but the vast majority of the profile of a mass shooter is that they are men.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was watching PBS last night, and they were talking about one of the school shooters from Michigan and showing some of the drawings, and one of them, it was talking about starting with a girl, and was a picture of her. And so I think and I remember there was a San Diego shooter, there was one in a yoga studio in Florida. And so I guess I'm just wondering, if there's a through line in the type of content that, these young men are taking in, or common through lines in what they're saying. I'm really trying to pinpoint, like, how misogyny is playing into, like, is it just showing up because it happens to, or is it a core part of what is driving this? And I just want to see how important that is.
I'll say
Dr.
a
Dinsley.
couple of other things to this, which is, number one is, there is a through line in some cases with misogyny and then targeting intentionally of young women. There's a small number of cases where that's true. And then those who've been sort of radicalized in the manosphere online, some of those darker corners of the internet where men's rights are a central theme of this. But I think the other component that you're referencing here is an overlap between domestic violence and mass shootings. So this goes in two ways. Our database looks at public violence, but the most common form of a mass shooting is actually a family annihilation. It's domestic violence is the most common form. Secondary, in our data, I think it's about 20 to 30% of cases actually have a nexus with domestic violence in advance, where somebody is actually, in some cases, targeted their own spouse or children before then going to perpetrate a mass shooting afterwards. And there is a history of domestic violence and domestic abuse before this level of violence ever comes to the fray as well. So it is something that we do see in the data. I think you're right to flag that.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. And then the last question I have is about AI and chatbots. I mean, we've just seen how incredibly harmful they've been, especially to young people. Full disclosure, I have a bill to prohibit them. But are you seeing that come up? I mean, I know we've seen it in individual instances of violence or self-harm, but are you seeing that play a role at all in perpetrators of mass shootings?
So yes, but the trends are still very early, right? Like, I just don't think there's enough data. For example, we know that the perpetrator in the British Columbia mass shooting asked AI and was talking about violence with AI, and, people just were trying to figure out, do they report, do they not report? They decided not to report. We are tracking cases. We have a database where we're tracking young people who are radicalized by AI and other types of those spaces. It tends to be towards self-harm so far, is the trends that we're seeing, but I think we're still very early. I also would just say, to your prior question, one thing we know about school shootings and mass shootings is that they're kind of angry suicides, right? It's a suicide, but who do I blame? And how do I take as many of those people down with me as long as I'm going? And so you find that on social media and online spaces. Like, we interviewed a sister of a very famous mass shooter who talked about how her brother went from this, like, it's all me, what's wrong with me, found an online space, and it was just a 180 to it's women's fault, and that's whose fault this is, right? And so some people blame women, some people blame a religious group, some people blame a racial group, but I think that sort of whose fault is this piece, we're finding more and more in those sort of misogynistic online spaces.
Fascinating. Thank you. Senator Lucero, you are next on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question and a comment. The first would be the question of the testifier. So I'm looking at slide one, or no, not slide one, it's number one. It's 2 slides back, there you go. Just wondering, you may have said it and I missed it, what is the time and scope of this? So I see N equals 17. What was the time frame, and what is this just Minnesota? Is this US? What is this?
This is the US, and it is all K-12 mass shooting events where 4 or more people have been killed in a school environment going back to 1966. But the first case is actually 1989. So the database goes to 66, but the first time a school shooting occurred was 1989. So there are 17 perpetrators of 15 different shootings. So those 15 shootings, many of them are very high profile. You probably know them. So Columbine, Parkland, Uvalde, for example. So 15 shootings perpetrated by 17 individuals, because 2 of those crimes had 2 perpetrators, like Columbine, for instance. So this is the group that we're referring to in this case. Now, in our other database of K-12 homicides, We have about 300 homicides that have occurred in K-12 schools between the year 2000 and 2025, the present day. And then within that, we can isolate what you might call active shooter scenarios, which is a definition that the FBI uses when someone's actively moving through space with the intent to kill people. It excludes things like gang violence or other felony crimes. If you include those, mass shootings would fall into that definition as well. We have about 30 cases which would fall into that definition.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, this is definitely a tragedy. It is tragic. And so in the two dates that I just heard, so 1989, roughly from 4+ victims, and then the year 2000 for homicides.
Yep.
So those are relatively recent dates within our time frame, relatively recent. And I'm thinking to myself, not just now, but for many years, the question I ask myself, observing these tragedies throughout society is, what changed? What has changed? Because this wasn't occurring as you go back prior to 1989, certainly to this degree. And among the questions I'm asking that is, well, peer pressure among youth has always been there. High school, you got young people, there's always peer pressure, there's always concerns and challenges of being a young person in high school, for example. Access to firearms, that's not a new variable. Firearms have been throughout our society since the founding of this country. The number of firearms in society, and in fact, many would argue the further you go back in time, the prevalence of firearms and the access to firearms was actually easier, because it wasn't only a few decades ago that it was a common practice for firearms to be brought to school, to either be left in the vehicle in the parking lot, to be brought into the school by the young people. And these tragedies did not occur. And so again, what changed? And as I'm answering this, just some of the thoughts that I have observing this is the lack of teaching of healthy behavioral channels for disagreement with others. We in society, whether young or old, there are disagreements among others. The question is, how do we disagree? There's destructive ways to disagree and to channel that output, or there's constructive ways to channel that output. And so I think a contributing factor, there's no single answer, I think, to what changed. It's multiple contributing factors. It's just my observation, lack of teaching healthy ways for that output. Another would be social media. That's huge, and that's a modern advent of our society. And I think social media leads to a lot of isolation. And isolation in young people is a contributing factor, in my opinion. Another would be, I just have observed in the modern day, a relatively modern advent, is the elevating of self, or I think you even mentioned the entitlement aspect. It's a destructive behavior for people to go throughout society feeling entitled. And if they have this unhealthy feeling of entitlement and they're not getting what they think they deserve, then they're going to engage in destructive behaviors because they feel that they're righteous in their cause of, again, elevating the self, promoting the self. And then that would also tie in with the lack of empathy towards others. Instead of being sacrificial and how can I serve others, it's how can you give me what I want? It's a selfishness attitude. And I think that becomes more prevalent as these modern dates have happened. Another that I see is just it also feeds into that, is the humanism. The humanism philosophy is, I'm self-centered, and what can society do to elevate me? Again, rather than that sacrificial philosophy. And then another contributing factor is just the glorifying of violence and the access to destructive content that young people have now. Their minds are not ready and may not be mature enough to have exposure to content that may be violence-ridden. And I know we've had the conversation in our society for decades now of what is movies and or video games, how is that desensitizing the young minds, making them more prone to act upon these behaviors of entitlement or disagreement? Again, not a question there, Madam Chair, but more just a commentary of we need to ask what has changed, because violence in young people hasn't always been the way that we're experiencing it now. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Any comments on what has changed?
I have a few clarifying points. So I mentioned our database started with 4 more killed in '89. There have been cases of school shootings going all the way back to the early 1900s, and including some very famous cases here in Minnesota in the 1950s and 60s, and also cases where people had brought weapons to school because they were part of shooting clubs and gun activities at the schools, who then turned them on their classmates. So it's not that this is a brand new phenomena, it's just it had never reached the point of 4 more killed until that point. But shootings in schools have been going on for a long time. There was a very famous case in the 1920s when a principal actually killed other teachers in schools, for instance. So the history of school violence goes back a lot longer. I do agree with the points around the changing nature of our relationship to violence and social media and other facts. And I think this question of like what has changed is really, really important. I think what's happened in some senses is our threshold for violence has been lowered, because the more in which these violent events occur, it becomes a normal feature of our society. And then we normalize it in our practices too. So by running children through active shooter drills 5 times a year, for instance, we have normalized that this is now an environment that violence occurs in, for instance. I think all of that is potentially contributing to this issue. But I think it's important to also think about, we actually have violent video games and all these things coded in our database. So if you want to interrogate it, please do. Like, jump into the data. We want to use that as a resource for you all. We've coded how many times people have been radicalized on the internet, playing violent video games, access to medications, all sorts of things is in the database. But the one thing I will say is mass shootings, the United States per capita has 5 to 7 times its share of mass shootings compared to the rest of the developed world. The rest of the developed world also has social media. The rest of the developed world also has violent video games. I mean, Japan is the video game center of the world, but it doesn't have mass shootings. So yes, things have changed in American society, but also it might be some of the things that have stayed the same that we need to also be focused on too.
Thank you. Thanks much. We have a whole list of people here, and we do have a couple more things to get done today, so if we can make our questions real concise, or your comments real concise, that would be really great. Senator Farnsworth, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question, you sort of answered it, but not exactly. So when you're talking about mass shootings, I think most people think of, like, in their mind, they think of like Columbine. But can you sort of delineate the difference? So when you're talking about the mass shootings, like what's the percentage of, the stereotypical crazy person that's, bringing a bag of firearms into a school and shooting versus the rest of the school, or not school shootings, but mass shootings that, like maybe it's a gang shootout in a mall parking lot or something. Do you have the breakdown on that?
So the exact breakdown is, I believe that sort of active shooter or mass shooting events constitute 2 to 3% of all events in our homicide database, which is for 25 years. That's how far our data goes back. But they constitute about 25 to 30% of the deaths in those accounts. So if you think about it, the exception is the mass shooting active shooter event. The more common form of gun violence in schools is an escalation of dispute or a spillover of community violence, when someone brings a firearm into school for protection, for instance, and then it's used in a fight, a gang-related retaliation, and so on. So the most common form of gun violence in schools is spillover of community violence and escalations of disputes. They tend to happen in parking lots. They tend to happen at sports events. They tend to happen not necessarily right in school hours. But then the active shooter mass shooting events, it's about 2 to 3% of all homicide incidents, but it's about 20 to 30% of all homicide deaths in that time period.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, I mean, the reason I asked the question is I think it's important there's different types of mass shooting. And if you were to just look at this slide, it talks about mass shootings, and then it sort of goes into school shootings. And you talked about 7% of people in that have been affected by mass shootings. What percentage of that was in school? What percentage of that was in the community? There was a slide that talked about, I think, 17%, only 17% of gang members have not experienced this effect versus like 75% of the rest of the public. So I think it's important when we're talking about this, the crazy person that just decides they're gonna go shoot up a school, that's a different, I think that's something that needs to be dealt with differently than just the regular like gang violence or, and so I think, you know, the motives of the person that wants to go shoot up a school for suicide is different than some gangbanger does not want to die. Like they're doing this to protect themselves or, you know, for whatever. I don't understand all of the motives. But I think this slide deck sort of blurs it all together, and it's really like, it's so much more nuanced than the way it's presented. And keeping in mind the chair's admonitions earlier, I'm not trying to attack the slide deck, but I feel like it would lead you to the conclusion that this, you know, 7% of people that have experienced this, as you go through the slide deck, oh, wow, 7% of people have experienced violence at school. Now, you didn't exactly say that, but I think the way the slide deck is presented, I think people would sort of come to that conclusion. But I think it's important, like the crazy school shooters, they have different mental health needs. But you know, people that are in gangs or just have, I guess, what you would call run-of-the-mill violence, that needs to be dealt with, I think, a little bit differently. So that's not really a question. I mean, I appreciate the data that's in here, and I agree with a lot of what Senator Lucero said. Something is different, you know, since 1989 in our society, and I think we would be well-served to figure out what is different in our society. And so anyway, I apologize for going so long. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Westlin, you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate you being here today. I think that as we are trying to approach school safety broadly as a topic, I think it's important to have data and evidence-based suggestions to us. Going back, I just want to touch briefly on sort of the profile information. We talk a lot, and we've talked in this committee before about adverse childhood experiences and actually the impact that has on kids on a broad range of things. Adverse childhood experiences can include abuse, physical abuse in the home, either toward the child or the child's observing it and experiencing it, can be neglect, can be a parent that's incarcerated, many factors. And my understanding from some of the information that you're providing is that actually kids who maybe have high levels of adverse childhood experiences seem to be fitting into this profile of kids that we're looking at here. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Yes, that is correct. So we code all forms of different adverse childhood experiences amongst specifically school shooters is where we see the highest rates. It's also where we have the most access to information. So that could be why, but yeah, we do see really high rates there.
Okay. And I think just again, to maybe shift our attention, a couple things I want to say for anybody who's not familiar with the Violence Prevention Project. They are really renowned for the research that they do. They are broadly supported by a variety of groups, including my understanding, I think, is the Gun Caucus has actually supported the work that you do because it is really so exceptional and well done. And so I hope that we are looking at the opportunity as a resource in terms of how we approach security generally, and not just gun violence, but security generally in our schools. And I want to switch a little bit because this will lead into my bill as well. But I'd like to focus a little bit more on sort of the intervention strategies and things that you've seen that have been successful and the things that you're recommending. I don't remember the details, but I know there's a few stories in your book. One was, I can't remember, she was a teacher or a school counselor, and a student came and sat in her room and literally had a gun on him. And I don't know if you could tell us briefly about that story and how that ties into having people trained to intervene with kids at risk would be helpful.
Sure, yeah.
Dr. Peterson?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a powerful story. It was a woman, she was a school counselor, and a young boy came into her office, kind of not speaking, had a gun on him, was ready to do a shooting, and she actually prayed with him, was initially her thing, and then she connected with him, she knew his name, she asked him who he was, she tried to really see him. Those specific skills, sort of crisis intervention, de-escalation training, there's very specific ways to talk to someone who's in that sort of crisis, to focus on feelings, to see them as a person, to use nonverbal strategies. Those are very teachable skills. And in fact, when we've looked at averted school shootings, kids that have been right on the edge, brought the gun to school, what stops them? Nearly every time is a human connection, right? Like there's been a janitor who talked a kid down from a school shooting because they knew their name, right? And so the more that we have people trained in how to do that, it's incredibly powerful. Of course, you don't want to be put in the position to have to do it. And ideally, you're doing that when someone is not armed and they're just in crisis. But making sure we know how to have those conversations both as adults and young people themselves. Like a lot of times they're interacting with peers who are in these dark spaces, and how do you connect? How do you talk to someone? How do you open them up? How do you get them out of that space?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Holstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to piggyback on something Farnsworth had said, Senator Farnsworth, sorry. The gang-related deaths and shootings, we kind of understand the motive behind those. When we look at the 17 number that you had pulled up, that requires the 4 deaths, that wouldn't include enunciation. And I think that we all feel deeply like we want to get to the root of what that problem was. So you said there's 30 since 2025 that could have been included in that if we expanded that definition. Do we have data like this that expands that definition that you could share with us after this committee?
Dr. Peterson?
Absolutely, we do, which is why, so the 4 or more killed definition is defined by the federal government. And this was a federally funded grant under the first Trump administration, which is why we used that definition and had to use that definition. Since there's been some changes, which is why we built the K-12 school shooter incident, because we wanted to capture every single death that happened in a K-12 school. So enunciation is certainly in there. That's where we use the broader active shooter, which gets at motivation, right? This person wanted to commit a mass shooting, whether or not they killed 4, 3, 2, 1 people. It doesn't really matter. We can talk about them in the same way. I will say the data really matches on to the 4 or more if you isolate those active shooters, and we can certainly share that information with you after the committee. And I will say, I mean, we are huge advocates of being really clear about what definition you're using and why, because you can say that there's 500 mass shootings or 5, depending on how you choose to define it. And so it's super important to be clear. The first section where we were talking about mental impacts, we defined it broadly, like 4 more people shot because we didn't want to be like, your depression we care about, but your depression we don't care about, right? So that was a broad. When you're talking about perpetrators and policy and intervention, that's where it's really important to delineate about motivation. So great point.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yes. So you had said earlier that 97% are men. Are you including gangs, the gang shootings in those statistics, or is that just of the 30? Okay. And then final question for you. You'd mentioned recent shifts, and I think we all agree that there's been something changing in the way these are happening in the last few years. Do these same demographics hold true? And just the females and the gender confused individuals, like the ones that make the news more, like those are definitely coming more recently. Is it just that of the 30, those are the ones making the news most recently, or is there an actual demographic shift in the last few years?
Dr.
I was just going to say, so the 30 number is this database you see in front of you. So it's the year 2000 to 2025. Okay, that's the time frame we're talking about. And then when you have any homicide that has occurred in a K-12 school setting for any circumstance. Within that, we can then delineate, was this gang-related? Was it an active shooter scenario? Was it a mass shooting where 4 or more were killed? 3 or more were killed? 2 or more? You can toggle accordingly, right? So we're talking about that percentage. In the last 3 years, I think we have in that database maybe 3 or 4 cases where somebody identified as being transgender. The number on the screen in front of you is 372 cases. So it's 3 out of 372 cases that we're talking about. Does that answer the question?
Follow up?
So now I'm confused because we had already limited it down to 30 cases, taking out the,
Oh, if you want just the active shooter cases.
of the active shooter cases in the last, let's say,
I think
5
they're
years, 3
all-
years.
They would
I
all
think all
fall into
three.
that
I
definition.
think all three
So
fall in
3.
there.
Okay, so are we seeing a shift in these demographics? That's my question, in the last few years.
Not necessarily, because, so 1 a year, right, is what we're talking about. It's still only about 1% of the cases in the database. So, no, I don't think we're seeing a shift. We've seen some high-profile cases that have got a lot of media attention. I don't think that that's a statistical trend.
Finished? Yeah, okay. Senator Clark? And then Senator Swedzinski, you would be after him.
I'm going to be briefer than I intended because I think most folks have asked my question. So thank you, Chair Kunish. To be clear, to the testifiers, this is a US-based database. Did you also look, is there also do you have a more expansive worldwide database as well?
We do not.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
And then my other question, that was what I thought. Thank you, Chair Kunish. The slide number 2, shooters are in crisis. I'm wondering about the accelerators from those crisis points. You talked about the intervention of prayer. Senator May-Quade talked about AI being an accelerator. Have you identified any other accelerators from moving people from crisis to action?
Great question. Once someone is in that active state of crisis, a lot of it is studying other shooters, so spending more time in those dark spaces. We're seeing shooters going into sort of Discord rooms and different chat rooms where people are highly encouraging them, validating their violence, and telling them to do it, so that's certainly an accelerator. People not intervening, I would say, like most of these young men say that they are very isolated and alone. So we did interviews with perpetrators of mass shootings as part of the book that we wrote, and we would always ask, is there anything or anyone that could have stopped you? And every time they would say, yes, someone could have stopped me, but there just wasn't anyone. And so a lot of times it's just tons of missed warning signs as they're escalating. You have to actively want to die. And I think that's another accelerant. If you don't want to commit suicide, you're not going to do it. And then a lot of times what slows them down is getting access to the guns that they need because they're young. They have to figure out a way to get their hands on firearms. So a lot of times it's once they get the firearms, that's when they can get the plan really in place.
Thank you. So Senator Swedzinski, and then we'll have hear from Senator Umov-Baden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I have an anecdote, 2 requests, a critique, and a question. I don't know if I got that out. My question is, when did PowerPoints become slide decks? So that might have been for Senator Farnsworth and anybody. And then my critique is it'd be really helpful if you put at the bottom of the PowerPoints or the slide decks what page number it is for us so we can cite them easier. And I don't know what page it is, but you it's the page with all the headlines or and the one at the bottom of the page from U.S. News and World Report, if it's still called that. Teachers are quitting in droves because they're scared of student violence and a lack of punishment. If you could somehow get us, me, whatever article that was from, I would really appreciate it. And then a couple pages later, research on drills. I think we should really have access to more than just this wonderful presentation, but the evidence that drills make students feel more anxious, evidence that drills are traumatic for some students, evidence that we need to know more about that, because right now we tend to be increasing the number of drills because we think it's making kids safer. And if it's actually counterproductive, we as a body should know more about that. I don't know, I taught for 33 years, and the saddest days, literally the saddest days of my teaching career, pre-cell phone obviously, was when I'd walk back into the classroom after passing time or split lunch, and I had to report to the kids that we had another Columbine today in such and such a place. And I wished I'd had the foresight to put a hidden camera behind me, because the looks on those kids' faces when they are being told by the adult in the room that we can't keep you safe, and that there's been another school shooting, and the looks just speak volumes without words. But I never had that hidden camera, so I can only have that anecdote in my head. And lastly, second to last, thank you for this very depressing but important presentation. And maybe this is a question for our U.S. senators and U.S. Congress representatives, but you know, we thought smoking was a pretty horrific thing, so we banned smoking on TV, right? You can't smoke on TV, is that right? So, and you know, why don't we ban gun violence on TV? That you can, you know, back in the old days, you know, bang, bang, and somebody'd fall to the ground. You probably never even saw the weapon or blood. And now it's all that gratuitous violence. And so is that something, is that the next no smoking being allowed on television shows? Or, and then the movie trailers, another thing. And I know Minnesota can't just ban, gun violence, but you go to this cerebral art house foreign film and the previews are all explosions and gun violence, and it's not at all what you went to the theater to experience. And so I know that question's much bigger than your presentation, but just something that you've sparked a thought in my head today, and for that I thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We do have to move on to the bill that we're going to hear, so if folks could make it quick when they speak. Senator Uma Verbaden, and then Senator Mayquade again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's so much in here that's sticking with me. That story of the counselor praying with the student, I think, is so powerful, and building that human connection. The care teams and the rebranding there of like coming from a place of how can we support these students, support these families. And even when you talked about the shooters finding this online community, like that's what's coming to mind for me, is finding community, sadly around a really violent, topic, but getting encouraged by others. It seems like they're so alone and they're so isolated. They're just looking for that sense of community. All that to say, I'm curious when we're looking at crisis intervention and suicide prevention, if there's things that if there's ways we're treating boys differently than girls, that's leading to this, this overrepresentation that we're seeing of young men in shooters, or if it's, related to, I'm looking at the slide on kind of the adverse childhood experiences, getting to a point of crisis, being suicidal, having, then moving to social proof. Like, do young men are they overrepresented in that space, or is it related to how we're responding to the young men who do have adverse childhood experiences, are suicidal? Is there something that is there a way we're treating them differently that's leading to this? And then if you can just generally kind of share what are the best kind of takeaways and practices for us on crisis intervention, suicide prevention.
Ooh, I'll try to do that fast. So I would say all of it, right? So it's both boys being exposed, a lot of times not as being, maybe not as great as expressing feelings, maybe we're not as great at asking about feelings, right? Coping mechanisms, all those types of things are different. So I think making sure you know how to have those conversations. And sometimes the person to connect and ask those questions is not necessarily the school counselor with the right letters behind their names, right? It could be the shop teacher or the football coach. And so making sure that everybody knows how to have those conversations, no matter what their role, is really critical. So I would say in terms of crisis intervention, suicide prevention, make sure every single person in the school who is near a children, from the bus driver to the lunch lady to football coaches, are trained in how to do this, and then where to direct once they've had that initial conversation, where information goes, and have care teams in every single school, in every single district, so that information is landing in one place, people are assessing it and intervening with kids in the way that they're gonna respond best to.
Wonderful. Any follow-up questions? That was a good question. Senator Mayquade, and then our very last question is going to be with Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will make it a very brief question. We were talking earlier about things that might have shifted. Has there been any shift either in occurrence or death toll or types of weapons used with the lapse of the assault weapons ban in 2004?
Yes, so we have seen an increase in the number of assault weapons being used in mass shootings. That went up. The percentage of mass shootings where assault weapons are used went up dramatically starting around 2017, 2018 is when we started to see the shift. So do you remember, it's like 30% are using currently?
We have the exact data on this, which we can certainly share with you. But basically what we saw is that the trend was relatively flat in terms of the percentage of mass shootings perpetrated with assault-style weapons, and that's a technical term or non-technical term. But what we mean by that is any weapon that would have been banned under the assault weapon ban federally from 94 to 2004. What we saw is that there was a sort of lagged effect. So it didn't immediately change during the ban or even immediately after it, but after several years, we then started to see an exponential rise in the number of assault-style weapons being used in mass shootings, to the point now where they're using about 50% of all mass shootings, where that number used to be more like 20%. So if you take your mass shootings in the data set and you divide them by time, about 20% of those cases were perpetrated with those types of weapons in the past. Presently, it's about 50%. So that rate has over doubled since the ban ended. But we can get you the exact numbers if you're interested.
That would be great. Any of these questions that you have data that you would follow up with us, you can send it to Emma Zelmer or Tessa, and we will distribute it to the entire committee. Thank you. And then Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be quick because there's no way you can answer this short. So I really wanted to highlight something Senator Lucero said, because I think he was right. Like I looked through, I remember watching a TV movie on the Texas Tower shooting in 1966, right? And then, and I think at the end of the movie, it listed like this was one of the first mass school shootings or something like that. Did not know about the principal. That is not great. But I guess my point is like something that Senator Lucero said too, in that like we didn't then see a wave of it after 1966. There wasn't this like uptick in it the way we just hear about it almost always now. And I thought Senator Lucero also brought up a good point about empathy, which I've heard other members say here too. We just seem to not have it. I remember, so I'm a history teacher before this, and we would show clips of World War II or Vietnam, and they were graphic, but it was always at the end of a unit after they had learned the context of it, right? The draft letters, the broadcasters who were on the ground, and so the reporters. There was a context around it where people understood the weight of war instead of just showing war clips, because that that would remove the empathy, right? But it's also important to teach what happened. So I guess that's a larger question, but it leads into my one question, which I think will be short, but if it's okay with the chair, I mean, would love to have you come back and talk more, if it does work, the CARE strategy, because we're in the process here of legislating, and I think when we hear this, it's such a heavy, dark topic, and our first thought is like, okay, well, I'm in a role where maybe I can be helpful. So that CARE strategy you're talking about, do you have any data on if that's working? And then if there was ever another time for us to meet, even offline, just to find out what's working about that, how can we, help with those mental health crises in schools? Thanks.
And I will say that, thank you for bringing that up, because it's one thing to get this information and data. I think we all need to process it, what we're seeing and what we're hearing, and we do have plans to now invite you back, but we do have another hearing that we're hoping to have that actually talks about what we should or can do, and that CARE strategy is certainly part of it. So thanks for bringing that up. And if you have a response, that'd be great.
Sure. I do think when we think about what's changed, one thing that has come up a lot is social media as an accelerant, both in terms of exposure to violence and in terms of reducing empathy, actually, because of that distance. I mean, what we're seeing, we can talk about movies and television, but we're seeing kids going on websites called watchpeopledie.com and going to Roblox rooms and actually engaging in school shootings in Roblox at really young ages, right? Like the stuff that kids are getting exposed to at young ages is really stunning in terms of removing empathy and sort of removing that or just increasing that exposure. We do have some initial data on the CARE team project. So we just did a first evaluation of year 3. We're going to evaluation of year 4, and it does seem to be working. Again, this is a pilot, but we'd be happy to talk more about that. We have full reports and data that we can share with you about that.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. I think I had a side conversation, like if we had 10% of your intelligence, we would be so happy. The way you are able to just know your information and respond so quickly and accurately is very much appreciated. And we will be in touch, hopefully, and ask you to come back and talk about CARE teams and what are some of the other things that we should be thinking about legislatively, not just in policy, but in funding. So thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear Senate File 2634. And while Senator Westlin is getting organized, I'd like to just point out we have some special guests here. If you've seen all these blue jackets walk in, those are our Future Farmers of America, FFA students. And I just want to say thank you for being here, and really hope that you are hearing some really good hearings and something not quite so traumatic, but possibly these are things that you've all thought about in your life. We know that suicide in farming and agriculture is on a rise, and so this is something that we're all looking at, we're all thinking about, and hopefully finding resources that are going to help not only our youngest community members, but all the way through, into
Madam
farms
Chair.
and agriculture. Senator Lucero.
I just stepped out and met with roughly 10 of them, and I tell you, I was incredibly impressed. Very impressive young ladies, and from 9th grade to 12th grade, and again, very impressed, and I'm excited about this group of young people being the next generation of leaders.
I would agree with you, Senator Lucero. We also are seeing them in our Ag Committee that I sit on, and so I love it when FFA comes to the Capitol, so welcome. So we're going to hear now Senate File 2634. Senator Westlin, welcome to our committee. The intention is to lay Senate File 2634 over for possible inclusion in a future bill. And if you would like to move your file before the committee, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do actually have an A3 amendment.
Okay.
And I would ask that we move that first. This does create an effective date. It does provide an appropriation that actually would function as a reimbursement as opposed to, oftentimes we do this in forms of grants to schools, but do this rather as a reimbursement. So that was the piece, the appropriation piece was missing, I think, in detail from the original bill. So I would like to move the A3 author's amendment.
Okay. Members, do you have the amendment in front of you? And Senator Farnsworth, do you have a question?
Yes, and I understand the tradition of accepting the author's amendment, and so I won't oppose that. I'm just wondering, the original bill said all school personnel in Minnesota, public, private, and charter, including teachers, must have access to the training. But the appropriation is for school districts, charter schools, and cooperative units. And so there seems to be, we're telling private schools they have to do this, but then they're not included in the funding. And so I'm just wondering if you could explain that, or if it was an oversight or something.
Senator Westlin?
Thank you, Senator, Madam Chair, and Senator Farnsworth. I will have to check on that. That may have just been an oversight. But as we get into the meat of the bill, I do want to be clear, we're not requiring anybody to do anything. We're expanding the availability of this to for people who want to get the training to get it. But I will be sure to check. We are laying it over, so I will be sure to check with our nonpartisan staff in particular to see if that's a change that we need to make in that section. It was not intentional.
All right, thank you. So all in favor of the A3 amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the A3 is passed and amended to Senate File 2634. And so if you'd like to now move your bill, and you may speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's great to bring this bill as a follow-up to the conversation we were just having. And while the conversation from the Violence Prevention Project was really around specifically gun violence, this bill really is focusing on the idea of school de-escalation training, and does certainly get to the gun violence risks, but goes much further beyond that. So under this bill, it would expand the annual training in the de-escalation and relationship building and evidence-based de-escalation strategies for all school personnel. As the bill states, it just says people have to have access to it. It is not creating a mandate. It's not creating a requirement. But what we know, especially from the testimony we just heard, is that every person in that school who is interacting with our students has an opportunity to intervene in a meaningful way with a child who might be experiencing a crisis. The training is already in existence, and my understanding that it is currently required training for Tier 3 and Tier 4 educators. And again, this would just simply allow others who want to and are interested in taking the training the opportunity to do that. It does outline also training components, and I can certainly have the testifiers discuss in more detail the specifics of the training. But I do think that, again, building on the conversation we just had, there has been an incredible breakdown in just relationships between human beings, and I think that has been accelerated by social media. And we have kids who are moving through school in the course of a day who may never have a meaningful internet interaction with an adult, and maybe are not having meaningful interactions with other kids. We're talking about kids who have adverse childhood experiences. These are kids who may be coming to school, experiencing trauma in their home lives, challenges in their home lives, challenges in their communities. And what we know from research around adverse childhood experiences is that the long-term impacts of those things can be mitigated simply by the interaction of that child with one caring, empathetic adult. And this really is about building on those concepts and those ideas to really put every adult in that school who's interested in getting the training in a position to have meaningful interactions with kids, to be able to identify kids who are at risk and funnel that information to people who would be in a position to intervene and assist. And so that's what this bill does, Madam Chair. Again, it is not a mandate, it's not a requirement. This is existing training, and it's about expanding it to people who may want to be on a care team, who may want to be on a crisis intervention team. And it really is part of this focus, I think, that we would like to make on having meaningful interventions with kids at risk in our schools before something bad happens. Preventing things is always better than reacting to situations. So that is my bill in a nutshell. And then we have some testifiers, Madam Chair.
Senator Lucero. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We will hear first from Laura Jean, the Pacer, from the Pacer Center. If you'd like to introduce yourself for the record, and you may begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for allowing us to speak here today. My name is Laura Jean. I'm Pacer's Public Policy Coordinator and a manager of our Parent Training and Advocacy Department. I'm also the parent of 2 teenagers, both with disabilities. I'm here to speak today in support of Senate File 2634, the School Personnel De-escalation and Relationship Building Training, creating safe and inclusive environments through building positive relationships and de-escalation training for all school personnel. This bill seeks to expand access to vital training that can help empower all of the adults in the school building to help keep everyone safe. As you all know, school environments face numerous challenges with increased threats to safety. Children with disabilities and those with a history of trauma struggle to feel safe in busy school environments. The heightened vigilance of students increases the risk of becoming more easily dysregulated, leading to disruptive behaviors that can create crisis situations. These students disproportionately experience escalated behaviors that may result in exclusion, seclusion, and restrictive procedures. Although unintentional, ableism embedded in traditional responses that are reactionary and punitive to challenging behaviors in the school setting often serve as triggers for these students, causing escalation. Assumptions about the intent of the student's behavior further perpetuates these negative interactions. Training in how to respond rather than react, identifying a student's needs and working with the student to find appropriate ways to communicate and get their needs met will decrease these disruptions and increase all students' access to their education in safe school environments. School staff face increasing challenges meeting the emotional needs of students with limited resources and staff, and they lack access to training. When teachers with Tier 3 and 4 licensures renew, they are required to have some training on positive behavior interventions, and all teachers are required to have at least 1 hour of suicide prevention. This is not enough. Presently, de-escalation training is only required for those staff members who use restrictive procedures and school resource officers. Typically, staff trained in de-escalation and crisis intervention are brought in to support a student after they have demonstrated they are dysregulated or have disruptive behaviors. With expanded access to this optional annual training in positive relationship building and evidence-based de-escalation strategies, school teams can help ensure students' needs are met and prevent escalating behaviors from becoming a crisis or safety concern. Children do well when they can. All children want to be successful, to be seen, heard, valued, and included. To do well, children need to feel safe, to be connected to trusted adults who can help them learn to communicate and can help them co-regulate. When all school staff have access to this optional training, they will be better prepared to help support safe, inclusive school environments that focus on positive relationships, restorative practices, and de-escalation. This bill focuses on prevention and will help make our schools safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jean. I have to agree with you very much. As a teacher of 20 years, that training was limited to just a handful of people in our school. And I felt then how important it would have been for all of us to go through that training. So thank you for sharing that with us. Next, we have Sarah McGinn, again from the Pacer Center. If you'd like to introduce yourself, and you can begin.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee, for having me here. My name is Sarah McGinn. I also work at Pacer Center, but I am here to provide testimony as a former paraprofessional, so kind of the boots on the ground people. I worked for 10 years as a paraprofessional in both preschool and elementary, so our youngest learners, in mostly setting 3 programs. I witnessed firsthand how many adult interactions a child moves through in a single school day, starting with the bus driver, continuing with the greeter, the office staff, general education teachers, paraprofessionals, special education staff, lunch and recess supervisors, related service professionals, before ending their day with one last interaction on the bus ride home. These repeated touch points are why school culture matters so much. Every interaction is a chance to foster connection, build community, and strengthen a sense of belonging that supports student learning. This progression of adult interactions reminds me of the saying, students who are loved at home come to school to learn, and students who are not, they come to school to be loved. You can replace the keyword loved with any other action word, supported, seen, emotionally nurtured, and the point remains the same. Every interaction we have with the students is a chance to create connections and build relationships that are essential for their success. We see this clearly when a child gravitates towards a preferred adult, someone who communicates to the child, "There you are," simply by their presence and their actions. Coming to school to be loved, seen, or heard can look different for every student. In my professional experience, this can often be disguised as anger, aggression, and even withdrawal. This takes a tremendous amount of school resources to correct in a reactionary response model, including an emotional toll, a physical toll, and ultimately financial tolls on a district and their staff. When all staff receive training or have opportunity to receive training that helps them to offer this kind of relational nurturing and safety, students have a greater chance to spend more of their school day engaged in learning and in their community, therefore building a greater opportunity for their own success.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your work in the schools as well. And then we have Aaron Sandsmark, Executive Director of Solutions, Not Suspensions, if you'd like to join us. Oh, I'm sorry, and then Maren Christensen Hofer as well, whichever would like to go first.
Thank you, Chair Kunish and the Senate Education Finance Committee, and to Senator Westlin for bringing this bill forward. My name is Aaron Sandsmark, and I'm the Executive Director of Solutions, Not Suspensions. My organization is focused on ensuring that every child has access to a positive and equitable education. SF 2634 helps to establish access to training that would create solutions we know can foster a more welcoming school environment with more positive outcomes for our children. At SNS, we often work with families and students who have, unfortunately, been harmed in various ways due to a lack of understanding and a lack of training. This legislation would help to provide that necessary training that will benefit educators and support them. Being underprepared for a mental health crisis, a behavior change, or shifts in needs that come from a disability both put the child at risk, as well as the teacher and other school personnel. The training outlined in SF 2634 would prioritize relationships, de-escalation, and help to bridge the gaps in our school environments. When many school personnel are not trained to de-escalate a crisis or elevated situation with a student, teachers and staff can accidentally cause more harm or unintentionally escalate the crisis. Our children need our help. We need to invest in this training and ensure our teachers are provided the support that they need and are seeking and requesting from us. Our educators deserve to be provided these necessary tools. SF 2634 would ensure all staff are equipped with more strategies and proper training to create a more positive school environment for our students. We are facing so much right now in 2026. We appreciate Senator Westlin for bringing this bill forward, and we encourage the committee to recommend this bill to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Christensen Hofer, if you'd like to introduce yourself and begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Maren Christensen Hofer. I'm a parent of a child with a disability, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Multicultural Autism Action Network. And I think today I'm really just going to speak to you as a parent. We know that in our schools, so often we evaluate our teachers on their ability to control and manage a classroom. We prioritize often compliance in a classroom management. But when a student is dysregulated, when their nervous system is overwhelmed, prioritizing control often makes things much worse. And as a parent, I learned this the hard way. No one taught me that when a child is overwhelmed, they need safety first. They need connection first, not authority and control. I was taught, you need to get control of the situation. You're in charge. But that approach often escalates the conflict instead of calming it. As a parent, I learned the hard way that when a child's nervous system is telling them, you are being chased by angry bears, the worst possible thing I can do in that situation is become the angry bear. But yet that's what we're often taught to do. What actually works is understanding the child's nervous system, understanding demand avoidance, understanding sensory overload, using co-regulation strategies and engaging in collaborative problem solving with the student or the child, not imposing solutions on them. When we as adults deprioritize our own need for control and instead prioritize the child's need for safety, that is when we gain stability in the classroom. It may sound counterintuitive, but believe me, it works. There are well-established research-informed approaches that teach these skills, approaches developed by experts like Dr. Ross Green, Dr. Mona Delahook, Dr. Destiny Huff. Locally, we have experts such as Kelly Maher and Dr. Ann Garrity with the University of Minnesota. And many schools, as we've heard, use pieces of this training, but the access is very inconsistent. Some educators receive this support, but so many do not. But yet every school has students who would benefit from this approach. We've heard a great deal today and in earlier sessions about school safety, and we're likely to hear more bills about discipline and exclusionary measures and restrictive procedures. But if we're serious about safety, we must equip educators with the tools that prevent crises before they escalate, tools that help teachers recognize the early signs and respond effectively. Senate File 2634 widens the access to tools that we know work and that many educational professionals want but cannot access. It helps to strengthen relationships, reduce escalation, and create classrooms where all students can succeed. So I ask for your support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to take questions and comments. Senator Rarick, you asked to.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize, I do have to leave committee a little early, so I appreciate going first on the list. I believe Senator Westlin, the first question I have for you is, you said in your opening remarks that this is existing training that's out there. Who is currently offering this training?
So Madam Chair and Senator, my understanding is the training is certainly already offered in setting 3 schools. And my understanding, again, is that Tier 3 and Tier 4 educators are required to take the training. So I know the training modules already exist. And really, this is just allowing other people within the school setting who want to access the training to be able to access it.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow-up, you also made the comments, that this is not a mandate, that, and I agree the language is saying that the school personnel themselves can take this or not. But what is your intent with the bill on who must be providing this access to is it the school district that must provide the access? And then is that, I'll just start with that.
Senator Westlin.
Madam Chair and Senator, I assume that whoever is currently providing it, I think MDE provides a significant amount of training. If the setting 3 schools have trainings available, like those modules would be available to other people. So again, these are existing trainings, and I believe they are mostly offered through MDE, but if any of my testifiers has any additional information, but it's my understanding is that we're not reinventing something, and school districts have access to this training, again, either through MDE or through their own local district. And we're expanding it to make sure that if somebody wants to take it, that they would have the ability to access it.
Senator Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I would just, I guess, if this is out there and accessible to school districts, I'm not quite sure what the need for the legislation is. What concerns me is when we do put language like we have in the bill where I'm going to see some of my really small school districts are going to see this and that they must provide access to this. And you know, I've heard from so many of them that they have very limited numbers of administrative staff that are already picking up a lot of these things, trying to incorporate them into their schools. And this is going to be yet another piece that they're going to have to pick up. And so that, I mean, I would sure hope if this is available through MDE, I guess, again, reiterating, I'm not quite sure what the need for the legislation is. If this is out there and available, that it is there, I can see wanting to raise awareness of this, but putting it in as a mandate, again, is something I struggle with, especially for our smallest schools, if it's going to have some of their administrative folks worrying about how do I incorporate this, how do I get it in. It's just something else that's actually, you know, piling more on such a few number of people in our smallest schools. That's, I hope we consider that as we bring this forward. Is this really needed as a requirement, or is it just something that we want to get out there more as an educational piece to make them aware of what currently is there if folks want it?
Madam Chair and Senator Rarick, I'm just going to reiterate again, there isn't a requirement, but what we do know is that most of our schools lack school counselors, other people. We have people throughout the educational system interacting with our kids from the time they, as was mentioned, from the time they get on the bus until the time they go home. And for those people who are interested in being part of this training, people who would understand how to de-escalate a situation, particularly if it's a student with a disability, and maybe there is nobody else who can help in that situation, it's helpful to have people who are interested in this training and want to be a resource for their small school, that they have the opportunity to do that. That's the only intention of this is really to provide a larger network within the school of caring, loving adults who are able to help de-escalate situations, help build rapport with students, help reduce risk for violence and other things that happen. That's really all it is, and people can sign up to take the training if they want to, or they don't have to. The school district is not required to do anything, but it's just, we want to make sure that if people are interested in being part of this, that they have the access to the training that our Tier 3, Tier 4 students or teachers already have. There are people who are mandated to take it. I believe SROs, I believe anyone who practices restrictive procedures, they are required to take the training. So it's already in existence. But it's saying if, you know, the folks who work in our lunchrooms, the folks who, the janitor, we've heard about different adults and different individuals have the ability to impact students positively during their day. And I think the more people who are interested in doing that and want to do it should have access to it. It just creates a network of adults in the school who have had actual proper training to be able to do this.
Yep. Thank you. And if I can just share, like when I was at the elementary school as a library media specialist, we had a care team of a handful of people. And when a student escalated, they were the ones that were to address that issue. And none of the other teachers, it was like hands off. You don't touch that kid, you don't talk to that kid, you don't do anything with that kid. But I had a number of kids, and because I have relationships with those students from when they're in kindergarten all the way through 5th grade, there were a number of them that would come down to the library where they felt safe and you know, had a good relationship with me. And there were times where I was admonished for even talking to the kid when they were in that state because I wasn't part of that care team. And when I asked, well, how do I get on the care team? They're like, there's no money to train you. So you can't, you know, don't do anything, which is really counterintuitive for me as an adult in a school. And I would have really appreciated having had that care, that training in order to do some of the work that you're talking of. So
Madam Chair.
thank you.
And as our testifiers have said, you know, our schools get the kids in whatever state they're in that day. And sometimes we have kids walking through the door who've just had something bad happen in their family. Maybe they've had a death, they've got some other trauma or experience. And as I said, once what we know about kids who are experiencing challenges or trauma and students with disabilities, that helping them learn how to self-regulate is a really important skill. And so having good, well-regulated adults around them and people with training on how to help a student sort of take that pause and take the step back. Actually, it's training that would be good for all of us. But anyway, I think it's really important. Whoever's greeting them may be the first person that kid interacts with when they come through the door. And so, you know, if we're talking globally about how we can improve sort of safety in our schools, relationship building within our schools, if there are people who want to do this training, that they should have access to it.
Senator, follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to, and I get what you're saying, but the language on 1.9 is saying that we must have access. And so I'm going to see that as our superintendents and our school boards are going to ultimately be looking at it saying, this is something that they are required to provide, and they're going to be having to ask themselves, how are we going to do that? I mean, I get it that individuals, school staff are not required, but the language in this bill is saying this must be available, so it is a requirement of someone. And so, I mean, we can't just say this is, that's why I'm saying, is this legislation needed, or should we be approaching this from the standpoint of, let's raise the level of understanding of the training is out there, and how do we get more people into it if they so desire it, without putting it as a requirement on a school district to do it. You know, maybe MEA can, you know, the Minnesota Education Association can expand on it on their MEA weekend, or some other organizations can help provide it. But I don't know that this legislation is the right way of going about it, because our school districts are going to, in my opinion, have to see this as a requirement that they have to provide.
Madam Chair and Senator, I think the intention is to say that you can't deny someone who wants to take the training from taking the training. I don't see it as creating anything new. The training exists, and if someone working in the cafeteria wants to take the training, they should be afforded the opportunity to do that. I don't know if that currently exists, and so I think we're maybe parsing words or understanding words differently, but again, the attention really is to ensure that for any person working within the building who wants to participate in the training, that they not be denied the access to existing training.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Senator Lucero, but before I do that, I just want to let you know that our last presentation from the Vital Networks about school staff mental health and retention, the testifiers have very graciously agreed to come back and continue this conversation. So we thank you for being patient with us this morning. It's been a really incredible conversation, and we actually look really forward to what you have to say with us and share with us. And so I appreciate you, your willingness to return on another day where we can really talk a little bit more. So thank you. With that, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to, whoever the second testifier was, didn't catch what the name was, but.
Sarah McGinn.
Phenomenal, and I completely agree. Her testimony was along the lines of love, seen, heard, relationships, and the lack of that happening at the home. It's very clear, and I would hope that we would all acknowledge that government cannot and never will be a substitute for parenting and for the love, the nurturing, the responsibility of parents. So that's first and foremost. We have very good teachers. We have very good staff. and professionals that are dedicated to trying to backfill the best they can, but they'll never be a true substitute. I appreciate the conversation in this bill, and Madam Chair, and to the chief author, it's along the lines that Eric was bringing up. So on line 1.9, it says must have access. So if it really is, if the intent is to prohibit schools from preventing opportunity, well, then we should make that very clear. Because I think the language right now, the reasonable persons test or the plain reading test would interpret must have access to mean that the schools have to provide or formulate some kind of access. And I would evidence that by, because in the amendment, we're allocating $10 million. So there's clearly some kind of an acknowledgement that there will be a cost, and to help offset some of that cost to the mandate of must have access, those dollars are being made available. So I think the language, from what I'm hearing, the intent, and from what the clear black and white language is, there's a dichotomy there. And I think it can and should be fixed. So I guess that's what I would offer, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any?
Madam Chair and Senator, I think that, so depending on the school district and the contract, my understanding is that some school districts might already provide for that sort of professional development to be paid for by the district. And there may be districts where that isn't the case. So we do want to encourage for those who want to take the training, this would provide a school district to say, hey, we trained 5 people, but it's not included in the professional development that we already provide, reimburse us for the training. And it's on a reimbursement basis. That just seemed to make more sense to me to do it that way, because not every school is going to have people who want to take the training. They may not have anyone take advantage of this. I hope they do. But the purpose really was to try to provide some reimbursement for school districts that may incur the cost in providing that opportunity to the people who want to take it. And again, I guess I'll just say schools will never replace parents, but what I will say is that there are some kids who are experiencing domestic violence at home, who may have parents who they're experiencing neglect. They may have parents who are incarcerated. They may have stressors at home where they aren't having their value as a human being reinforced. And what I know is my experience as a kid going through school and having challenges, in my home, was I walked in that door and I was greeted with people that I knew cared about me and wanted me to become the best version of myself. And I see teachers do that on a day in and day out basis. There are also kids, though, that will require some additional training. It's not just a matter of being kind to them when they walk through the door. It's being able to say, this kid's really dysregulated. What's the best way for me to approach that? Whether I'm the greeter, the person in the cafeteria who's observing something happen, throughout the system. So if we're talking about generally mental health of our students and their well-being in our schools, I think the more people who want to be part of this, who want to be part of a care team, who want to be part of a crisis intervention team, who want to participate in this, that they should have the opportunity to take the training should they choose.
Thank you. Senator Farnsworth, you have a comment, and then we have, Senator Hallstrom was before you. Senator Hallstrom, and then Senator Farnsworth, and then unless you have a burning question or comment, we're going to wrap it up.
I've got a couple quick questions. First off, in the amendment on the appropriation, we call it a one-time appropriation available for the next 27 or so months. But this is, line 19 says must have access to annual training. This is going on into the future, correct? So there will be a cost that we lay on, an unfunded cost that we lay on school districts moving forward. Is my understanding correct there?
Senator Westlin.
Madam Chair and Senator, I think that the intention is to fund it and to see, first and foremost, what the cost, what the reimbursement requests actually are. And it could be a significant portion of people serving in our schools now on the front end would be trained. So whether or not there would be a need for ongoing money, but I wanted to put at least some money in here, again, to provide reimbursements for school districts where they might not already have that built into their professional development program.
Follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Westlin, so thank you for clarifying that. Is it your understanding, and I truthfully don't know, is this a required annual training to keep up on it in the school, or can this be a one-time thing and then renewed throughout their continual annual trainings?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Senator, it's not required training for anybody except the people currently required to do it. And so this is, I'm envisioning a one-time training for sure, and then if they want to continue, again, if the training modules continue to be available to them, that they could do so. But I want to be very clear, nobody has to do this. Not one person in the schools could sign up for this. They may say, nah, I've got enough on my plate, I don't need to do this as well. But we are just trying to ensure that if there are additional adults in the building who want to be part of this network of care, that they have the actual proper training to do it, so that they can be a support for our students.
And follow-up.
Yeah, one last thing, and I want to clarify on the private school or non-public school. I think it would make sense to add a. We've acknowledged, I think, that it's an oversight. Maybe we can add a voice amendment to just add them into the appropriation here. Basically striking line 1.8 where it says public or private schools, adding in non-public, and then on the A3 amendment, just adding non-public schools into line 9. I think that would make the most sense. If it could be friendly, I think that'd be reasonable. And again, I think the purpose of this, and I agree with you, and I don't want to impugn motives here, but I think that we all agree we need to provide de-escalation, whatever we can do to make all of our schools more safe. I would think that we want all the schools to have access to that as freely as possible.
If it's all right, Senator, I think this bill needs a little bit of work to be done, and what we'd like to do is work with the author on that and then possibly bring it back to you for approval, but we can, there's a few things that we would like to work on, and so if you wouldn't mind working with us, and then we can make those changes.
Madam Chair and Senator, I would just want to check with our nonpartisan staff to see if there was I'm not opposed philosophically to this. Yeah. I just want to have a conversation to make sure that there isn't some reason why we wouldn't do that.
Sure.
I agree that everybody should have the training. I'm big on that, but that's a question that I don't have an answer to. And I'd like to check with our nonpartisan staff in particular on this issue. And I'm happy to continue to work on this. I just think that this is an important part of us moving forward to having schools that are able to properly support our students.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, and then finally, Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm trying to get my thoughts in order, and I don't necessarily have a question. I just kind of want to raise a thought for future discussion. I'm probably the only one in the legislature that has taken a training like this as an EBD teacher, and I'm sort of in the middle of the road when we're talking about how to deal with dysregulation or behavior problems, whatever you want to call it. For example, I've had teachers that have complained, like, so-and-so, he puts his head down and he sleeps through my whole class. And I'm like, so what? Is he disrupting class? Leave him alone. But then there's been instances, even this school year, where students have just gone berserk and they're flipping over bookcases and the other kids are in danger. I think training is important, but I think we also need to acknowledge, and I can tell you from personal experience, if a student is experiencing a crisis like this, it can take a long time to help them work through it. And one of the concerns that teachers have told me is, and this is sort of a change in the last 10 years, if somebody is going through a crisis like that in a classroom, you don't remove that student from the classroom, you evacuate the other 29 kids in the classroom. And I think we have to have a serious discussion. Yeah, we want to work with those kids. I've spent a career working with kids with disabilities, teach them those skills. But we also have to remember that there's 29 other kids in the classroom. I've had a parent call me this year, and she said, my daughter has come home crying 3 out of 5 days because so-and-so, this student, goes crazy in class every day. They evacuate the class, and she can't handle it anymore. And so your bill doesn't really address, I mean, it addresses the training, which is helpful, but I think we also need to take into consideration, what about the rest of the kids in the class? And I think the Department of Education a number of years ago released a report that said that less than 25% of the time in a school is actually used for teaching. And this is part of the reason for that. And so I think we have to look at this a little bit more holistically. Yes, we want to train people. This is good. I received a version of this training, but we also want to think about the rest of the kids and what they're lacking. If the third grade teacher has to stop what she's doing or he's doing and spend 20 minutes, what are the rest of the kids missing? So I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's something that we don't talk about enough.
Madam Chair. Senator, I agree we should have the conversation. I also agree that's not this bill, but I agree that it's a larger conversation to have.
Great. So with that, Senator Westlin, this bill, Senate File 2634, as amended, is laid over for possible inclusion in a future omnibus bill. And again, we will invite Vital Networks back another day when we have a little bit more time to dig into the work that they're doing. Tomorrow, we're going to hear 2 bills. Last night, our committee administrator, Emma Zellmer, emailed you all copies of my author amendment to Senate File 3593. That's a constitutional amendment relating to school trust lands. Would you please review the amendment and reach out with any questions? We'll also hear Senate File 1201. Note that this is a vehicle bill, and the language that is being amended onto the bill has been posted online since Friday. We will not have an education finance hearing on Thursday of this week. And with that, this committee is adjourned.
Thank you.